Kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai. Welcome everyone to this New Zealand Green Building Council Housing Summit for 2024. My name is Peter Wolfkamp. I will be your MC and sort of herder of cats today. So I would like to express my thanks to Andrew, to the team at the New Zealand Green Building Council for the opportunity to be your MC today. As always, there's a few housekeeping things that we need to do. I just want to check too that it seems like we're a little overwhelmed in terms of seating. So those people at the back, there are plenty of seats right over here. Take the time, find yourselves a seat. There'll be opportunities obviously during breaks to sort of reorganise yourself as well. But I'm sure there's plenty of seats. So those of you lingering at the back, feel free to take some of those tables over there. A couple of other housekeeping items. There are washrooms here in the foyer, and then further up the stairs on the way to the main foyer, there are some washrooms there as well. The event is obviously no smoking and no vaping. If you do feel a need to do that, then there are areas allocated outside. Now, in the unlikely event of an emergency, please follow the staff. They will be here to guide us. From this room here, the exits are to my left and to my right, so either side of the podium. We'll exit the building out through the loading dock, and then the fire assembly point would be at the road at the end of the loading dock. Also, for those of you who have taken the time to download the app, great, and use it. It's got all of the times, it's got bios for all of the speakers, it's got the entire schedule for the event. It is also the device by which you can interact with our speakers later on when we have a question and answer session. So you can add your questions there, they will be moderated, I hasten to add, and then we can use those as part of our Q&A discussions. If you have a name badge, and thanks to Kingsband for the sponsorship of that, there is a QR code that will take you to your App Store or Google Play to download that. So I encourage you to do that. It's very, very functional, works very, very well. Just by way of introduction, so my name's Pete Wolfkamp, and I'm a carpenter, and I'm a current LBP. I'm licence number 120098 under the current regulations. So it is, and I've had a career in carpentry, building some 37 years. Along with that, I happen to have done a little bit of broadcasting. I've been involved with the Block television series for 10 series. And I wanted to mention too that with the support of the Green Building Council back in 2016, the houses that we did at Meadowbank were done to a Homestar standard. And so at the end of that series of the Block, we completed the houses and they were rated a 6 and a 7 star, which, think back to 2016, across the sector, across the industry, we were probably struggling to get to somewhere around a 4 or a 5. I note that sometime in that transition, Green Building Council, Homestar have ditched all of the numbers below 4, but that's pretty much where we were building. So, you know, that was a proud achievement for myself personally as a carpenter involved in that process, but also as a way of showing to the public the benefits of the Homestar process and what can be achieved in terms of building better houses for our community. Also, for those of you who might be up at sort of 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I host a radio program at News Talk ZB called The Resident Builder on Sunday, and it's all about engaging with the population in terms of answering questions about DIY, but it's also a platform, I feel, for me to deliver to a fairly wide audience new ideas around better building practice. And one of the ways that I do that is by introducing guests. One of the people who's been actually a fairly regular contributor to my show, and I'm eternally grateful to that, is our first speaker today. That is Matthew Cutler Welsh from the New Zealand Green Building Council. He's got an extensive background. He's been with the Green Building Council for a number of years, and also I tune into his podcasts, Homestyle Green, on a fairly regular basis. So I was listening to one the other day, and it was very much about, my goodness, you know, we've got so much more work to do. And I was listening to it thinking, well, when I did the Homestar version 1 training in 2011, and I pulled out the manual from my filing cabinet the other day, the person who presented it said, we will never see a 10-star home in New Zealand. That was his professional opinion when presenting the Home Coach in 2011. Thankfully, that is completely untrue. there have been a number of 10-star houses that have been built, and in fact I met Andrew Eagles a little while ago at the Low Co house, which has been built along with by Fletcher Living in a fairly typical subdivision as part of that urban growth that we have around the Auckland area. So I feel it's great to go that prophecy did not come true, that we do have 10-star homes, and we're on a journey to creating more and more better housing. So that's what it's all about. So I'd like to welcome as our first speaker Matthew Cutler Welsh.
I don't know who possibly could have said that 10 years ago. Who would have taken training for Homestar 10 years ago? I'm not sure. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you very much. I'm privileged to live in Meadowbank, and I get to go past those houses every day. They stand out because they're one of the houses that don't have condensation on the inside every morning. So I'm quite proud of that. Hey, look, we've got a lot to cover today, so we need to get a move on in more ways than one. I hope that you will leave here with a bunch of really good information, some inspiration, and new connections. Meet the people at your table, use the app, connect over LinkedIn. What I hope people will leave here today with is a really good understanding of why Aotea needs Homestar, that by doing Homestar you're in really good company, and that you have some really practical steps for making cost-effective and impactful change. Before we dive in, I'm going to take a little look at what's going on around the world. So we're going to start in Europe, where things really are getting underway, and they have been getting underway and getting quite serious on climate change for some time. On March the 12th this year, the European Parliament adopted plans to reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. And this is notable that it was the latest iteration of a directive that was first approved back in 2002 and adopted by the European Parliament in 2003. This revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive aims to progressively reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption to ultimately make the European building sector carbon neutral by 2050. I remember when 2050 used to be way, way in the future. Reality is it's getting close, and to ensure that they get to that target, they've introduced some new interim measures just recently. So by 2030, all new buildings will be zero carbon, zero emissions. They plan to renovate the worst 16% of performing homes, and they also plan to cut emissions to 55% of the 1990 levels by 2030. By 2040, they aim to phase out fossil fuel heating and cut emissions compared to 1990 levels by 90%. And they're throwing some serious money at that. Also, let's go to the US. They are really getting on with things too. You might have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA is the largest piece of federal legislation ever to address climate change. It's estimated that this act will see investment of around $780 billion in provisions relating to energy security and climate change. It includes $663 billion in tax incentives and $27 billion for a green bank created by amending the Clean Air Act. So what about us here in Aotea? Well, up until recently, we had something called the Government Investment in Decarbonising Industry Fund, or you might have heard it as GIDI, worth $650 million. And perhaps the most prominent investment from the fund was a $140 million contribution to upgrade part of New Zealand Steel's coal-fired recycling plant to a more efficient electric arc furnace. This is New Zealand's largest single emissions reduction project to date. It was estimated by Treasury that between the beginning of the program and 2050, GIDI would have generated 10 million tonnes of carbon dioxide savings in New Zealand. Unfortunately, the fund has been scrapped. We finally updated the insulation standards for New Zealand last year. We got it done. We'll come on to that in just a moment. We also have this plan called Building for Climate Change that lays out a strategy for reducing our buildings' carbon footprint and for adapting to the inevitable changes that we're already seeing. The work program for Building for Climate Change published by MB in 2023 states that in 2025, the building industry will have new reporting requirements for operational and embodied carbon emissions in new buildings. It also has phased lowering of caps for operational efficiency and embodied carbon. As of today, we have 224 days before the start of 2025. In today's parlance, that's 2 quarters or 2 100-day plans. Perhaps we can chunk it down and get that done. As mentioned, we have recently updated the insulation requirements for buildings in New Zealand. And when we compare the general level of R value required for our roofs, walls, floors, and other similar places around the world, we can compare ourselves to places like the southern part of Australia, England, Germany, California. It's actually got quite similar climate to us here. But by doing this, it paints a pretty interesting picture. We've nearly doubled the amount of insulation that a lot of people will put up in their roofs. But if designers and builders, as they often do, simply follow the schedule method, then we end up with a very unbalanced insulation layer around our homes. Requirements for our relatively thin walls and under-insulated floors are still comparatively low when we compare ourselves to other places around the world with similar climates. We're also very much behind the ball when it comes to airtightness. The rest of the world has been measuring and mandating airtightness in buildings for decades. Even Australia now has an airtightness pathway in their National Construction Code. The lower the permeability target on this plot, the better. But where's Aotea? Aotea is kind of still in the 60s, maybe the 70s. In New Zealand, our building industry is still heavily influenced by 3 decades between 1961 and 1990. Average temperatures for 23 out of the 33 years since 1990 have all been above the 1961 to 1990 average. And these higher temperatures have been occurring with increasing consistency and amplitude. The reason why this period is significant is because that's the period of time that's quoted of NIWA data in our building code still today. So what else is going on out there? Last year we had 37,239 building consents for new dwellings. Previous peaks were 40,000 in 1974, right in the middle of that 60s to 90s period, and another peak in 2022 of 50,700. Homestar launched in 2011. We now have over 9,000 certified Homestar homes across the country. And as I mentioned, by doing Homestar, you are in very good company. The growth has not been linear though. Last year alone, we had over 5,000 dwelling registrations, which, considering it's still a voluntary scheme, is still impressive. We've also recently launched Echo, which is our energy modelling tool. And we've had fantastic uptake in that. It's been quite incredible. We have now over 10,000 energy models done on that platform. Also, let's talk about cost. Building a house in Aotea is expensive, but as we'll hear today, it's not sustainability that's the expensive part. Building a house is just expensive as it is. We're going to hear today about the relatively small uplift to go from building code to Homestar can be as little as 0 to 0.5% in most of the country. The corollary to that though, the only way to get that price down is to make sure you engage the right people early on. Which reminds me of this plot that I saw pretty early on when I first started coming to green building conferences over a decade ago. It describes the importance of getting everyone in the room early on in the project and to invest in good consultation and planning. This plot is as relevant for an individual house as it is for reducing carbon in our national economy or for changing the course of the planet. Time is marching on, and as it does, the cost of implementation is increasing. So best we get on with it. Thank you.